So this video is being recorded, and we will be presenting some really exciting educational content today related to medical cannabis or low THC oil in Georgia. And we have three additional speakers outside of myself. And we will also be launching two exciting research studies today at the end of our presentation. So the educational portion of this webinar will go from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. today. And then we will have an optional Q&A starting at 5 p.m. So at any point in time throughout this webinar, if you have a question for any of the speakers or the panelists, please feel free to put your question in the Q&A box in the chat, and we will get to it starting at 5 p.m. So again, thank you all for being here today. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and launch right in. So again, Georgia Atlas, I'm the Chief Research Officer and very honored to be part of this company. Georgia Atlas is a medical cannabis company that has applied for a low THC oil cultivation and production license in Georgia. And we're very excited to be here today together with our two community partners, the CanniMedic and Georgia chapter head for Minorities Medical Marijuana, Stanley Atkins, and Angela Weston from the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society. And so I'd like to now invite our panelists to introduce themselves and their current positions and their current role in the cannabis industry. Why don't we start with you, Dr. J?
I'm Jay Smith. I'm currently a practicing emergency physician, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Georgia Atlas.
Awesome. Angela?
I'm Angela Weston. I'm the co-founder of the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society. I'm also a student at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy in their medical cannabis therapeutics, medical cannabis science and therapeutics program.
Awesome. Congratulations for that. Stanley?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stanley Atkins II. I'm known as the CanniMedic. I am the Georgia chapter director of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. And I'm a Georgia Atlas advisor on this research program. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you all for being a part of this important event and research studies that we're launching today. So going over today's event, we wanted this to be an educational event to provide some information about what is medical cannabis generally, what's the state of the evidence around medical cannabis and the clinical use, and what's the history around medical cannabis, and then to really drill down and understand in Georgia the experience of Dr. J and others around medical cannabis and what has been the low THC oil and what's been the history so far to get us to where we are today, and then what are some future directions that we think the state of Georgia could take to expand access for all patients. Then after that, after myself and Dr. J will be presenting, will be followed by Stanley, who will discuss the state of the current program in Georgia for low THC oil and medical cannabis. Also looking to understand what are some key patient considerations in terms of vulnerable communities and other patient populations and how we should really be addressing the needs of those in the state of Georgia. Following Stanley's presentation, Angela Weston will be presenting on the great work that they do at the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society, which is patient-focused education, trying to really get the word out about medical cannabis and value medical cannabis, help medical patients find and get a low THC oil card, and we'll hear more about all of the great work that she's doing. And we'll launch the CanniShame campaign. Finally, we will end the first part of our session with the launch of the Georgia Medical Patient and Veteran Study, which I'm very excited about, and that we're collaborating with Georgia Atlas and with the CanniMedic and the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society on. And then we'll be followed by a Q&A. So let's get right to it. I will apologize in advance if this information is too basic for you, or if it's maybe even a little over your head. Try to really work to understand, provide just the basics about what is medical cannabis and how does it actually work in our bodies. So let's start off with the endocannabinoid system. So our body has a natural system called the endocannabinoid system. Now, this actually is a fairly recent discoveries around the endocannabinoid system and the different receptors that are associated with our endocannabinoid system and how these receptors in our body actually interact with cannabinoids, both within cannabis and with other plants and our own bodies endogenously create endocannabinoids. So the body's endocannabinoid system has two sort of main receptors that have been discovered. One is the CB1 and the other is the CB2. And those relate to your motor function and also to your nervous system function. And it's thought that the endocannabinoid system in the body is really meant and works to maintain our body's homeostasis and interacts with all of the other systems in our body, including the central nervous system, GI, immune system, etc. Within these receptors, these cannabinoid receptors, we have in our own body, our own endogenous cannabinoids that we make that interact with these receptors. However, these receptors also interact with cannabis. Now, what is cannabis? Well, cannabis is a plant. It's a plant that's been used as a medicine for at least 3,500 years. It's one of the oldest documented forms of medicine. It's been used in a wide variety of cultures in history and in currently today. Now, how is cannabis used? Usually it's grown and the flowers are dried and cured and smoked, or these are often then sometimes extracted, turned into oils, and using all other parts of the plant to make a variety of medical products that either can be oils or combusted, and we'll hear more about those product types later. Now, low THC oil, which is available in Georgia now, and we're hearing more about it, is actually a form of medical cannabis. And I'll explain more about that. So there's a few forms of cannabis or types of cannabis that are important to kind of understand. There's a cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, cannabis ruderalis. These all have different impacts on the body that I won't go into in detail, but we'll point to some resources that you can go and study more. Now, there's, to date, to what we understand, there's more than 120 compounds that are found in the cannabis plant. And these compounds include cannabinoids, such as THC and CBD, which folks might have heard of, but they also contain terpenes and flavonoids and other compounds. Now, when we talk about cannabis, what are we talking about? We're talking about these different terms of how people have described cannabis over the years. Marijuana is probably a very commonly heard one. Now, more recently, we call this gas or exotic. It's weed, pot, skunk, ganja, keef, hash, herb, grass, dope, Mary Jane, reefer, broccoli, chronic, smoking the bud, giving some bones, dank, cabbage, and pith. So these are all different names and terms used for the same plant. Now let's talk a little bit about hemp and cannabis. So hemp, they're both from the same species of plant, but hemp is regulated as it would contain less than 0.3% THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. THC is the psychoactive component of cannabis, and I'll discuss it just slightly in a minute. Now, hemp is regulated differently than cannabis, and it's regulated usually under the USDA, or the agricultural sector in the United States, whereas cannabis is usually regulated under state agencies or commissions. Now, cannabis is regulated as it contains more than 0.3% THC. And again, in Georgia, cannabis will be regulated by the Georgia Medical Access to Cannabis Commission. So it's important to understand the low THC oil and the market that we're speaking about is different than the over-the-counter CBD hemp-derived products that you can buy currently in Georgia. So when we think about cannabis as a medicine, as I mentioned, by the 8th century, cannabis was used in all of these different cultures and contexts. And in the 1830s, an Irish physician, William O'Shaughnessy, was credited with bringing cannabis to the West and conducting animal studies. Then from 1842 to the 1890s, cannabis was one of the 3 items that was the most used in patent and prescription drugs in the United States after alcohol and opium. But from 1850 to 1937, cannabis was listed as the prime medicine for more than 100 separate illnesses and health conditions in the US pharmacopoeia. So this is not new, as cannabis has medicinal value clearly for a very long time and has been used as a medicine for a very long time. But what's really important for us to understand is the history of why we don't know very much about it. It became out of our US pharmacopoeia. And the history behind cannabis prohibition not only needs to be understood, but it can and it should determine the future of the cannabis industry in the United States and in Georgia. And that future can include intentional restorative justice programs that address the effects of the failed war on drugs that I will speak about, and can also advance medical research while simultaneously increasing access to medical cannabis for all of those who need it. So when we talk about marijuana prohibition, what happened? Why do some people still think that cannabis is a gateway drug? So what happened in 1937? In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, and Harry Anslinger was placed as the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs in 1931, who held the post for 31 years. And started the war on drugs, which disproportionately targeted people of color with mass incarceration in the United States, and started the devastating toll and impact that this had on thousands, if not millions, of lives in the past and currently. Now, if anybody knows Reefer Madness or remembers that movie came out and a campaign was launched that waged a war against people of color, Mexicans, and basically coined the term marijuana, which is a somewhat racist term, a derogatory term now considered, which is why I tend to use the term cannabis, to print in newspapers campaigns around Reefer Madness, scaring people about cannabis and telling them that it was worse than the other drugs that were on the street market. And this campaign ran and still has legacy impacts today. People are still being arrested for cannabis crimes, and there's still more work that needs to be done. But as a result of this Reefer Madness campaign, medical cannabis research was also banned in the United States in 1976. I do recommend, if you can, grab a copy of this book. A friend of mine just lent it to me. The Emperor Wears No Clothes. It's got some really good history about all of these points that I'm bringing up today. So again, this is some of the information around Reefer Madness and what happened, and some of the advertisements. And when we look at when cannabis research was banned in the United States, we try to understand, well, what happened? If cannabis was used as medicine, and then it was banned, where did the money and the funding go? And recently, this is a publication that came out in August of 2020 that looked at the trends of funding for cannabis research between the year of 2000 and 2018, and found that just over half of the money on cannabis research was spent to understand the potential harms of cannabis. And just over 1 billion came from the largest funder, which is the United States National Institute of Drug Abuse, which gave more money to understand the misuse and the negative effects of cannabis rather than the therapeutic effects. So we just need to understand, when we look at the literature, when we understand the scientific literature, who funds literature and what are the research aims, and try and really have a balanced understanding around cannabis and its value and its potential value for patients in the future. So as the evidence and the numbers of patients are increasing around the United States, each states are increasingly passing medical cannabis laws and adult use laws. And as of 2021, we can see that medical cannabis is available in 15 states and adult use cannabis is legal in 16. And hot off the presses, as of May of this year, the DEA finally announced that it will begin issuing cannabis cultivation research licenses to companies outside of the University of Mississippi, which is right now the only US approved cultivator that you can acquire cannabis for research purposes in the United States. And it's not representative of what you could find in the medical and adult use market. So it's exciting news. The DEA is expanding their research partners. Now, one important name to note is Dr. Mechoulam. Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in the 1965 was the first to synthesize CBD and THC, and his laboratory still cranks out some of the most advanced science in the field. So I would definitely follow his work. Now, what are these compounds that he spoke of and that he introduced? THC, which is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. It's the primary psychoactive component in cannabis. It provides a cerebral head high, so to speak, and the synthetic form is actually called Marion. Now, CBD is cannabidiol. Cannabidiol is legal in all 50 states if it's less than 0.3% THC, which means hemp-derived, not cannabis-derived. It's mind-altering but not intoxicating. It's anti-inflammatory, and its synthetic form is Epidiolex. There's limitations on how much CBD can help with different conditions. As I mentioned before, there's 120 plus compounds in cannabis. These are cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids, flavonoids, lipids. One important thing and an aspect of cannabis medicine that I think is important to note is the entourage effect. What is the entourage effect? The entourage effect is the idea of whole plant medicine. All of those different compounds that I talked about, cannabinoids, terpenes. Here are some cannabinoids here, CBD, THC, THCA, CBG, CBN, CBC. Now, all these different cannabinoids and terpenes, and they interact, they result in enhanced efficiency of each other. So they build each other up. So the more that you try and isolate one compound out of a potential mix that could be much more beneficial, you're losing potential efficacy there. One thing I'd be remiss not to talk about is the importance of lab testing and knowing what is exactly in your products. When you go to the gas station and you see CBD, you cannot entirely be sure that CBD is actually in there. Sometimes we call that snake oil. Basically, you want to make sure that what you're consuming has been lab tested, you know what's in your label, you know what's in the product. And that comes with regulated products and making sure that you have high quality. Now, sometimes people will say, well, that's expensive. It's more expensive. I can get my CBD online for $20. Well, you don't know what is in that CBD online for $20. There's a reason it's probably $20. You really want to make sure, because this is medicine and it's for your health. So you really want to make sure that you have products that are free from contaminants and that are lab tested and safe to use for medical use. Now, we can see a study here that was done recently who looked at over 90 products that were on the shelf and did a lab testing review of those CBD products. This was published in 2017 in a scientific journal. And out of those almost 100 products that were tested, 26% contained less CBD than labeled. So be aware of what you're getting. Now, Georgia, low THC oil is legal, and the licensees will be awarded in summer 2021 to cultivate and manufacture low THC oil and products. So this is the actual legal definition of what low THC oil is in Georgia. It means it contains an amount of cannabidiol, but not more than 5% weight of THC. And we can see that there's 17 different health conditions that Georgians, if you face these health conditions, you can qualify to get a low THC oil card in the state. I won't read them all out, but you'll be able to see if you go to the Department of Public Health at the Georgia Atlas website as well, you'll be able to see all of the qualifying conditions. Now, one important point specifically in Georgia that's really important for us to be aware of is that the opioid epidemic is taking a really large toll on our citizens in Georgia. From 2010 to 2017, the opioid overdose death rate increased by 245%. Now, in Georgia as well, we understand there are cannabis researchers that I highly admire and cite quite often, and that is Dr. Bradford and colleagues. They ran a study in 2019 looking at states' data with medical cannabis programs and their Medicaid reporting around opiates. And they saw a nearly 15% reduction in opiate use among residents in states with medical cannabis programs. So with Georgia having such a high opiate rate and this potential value, it's very exciting. So just to share a few resources here with you, won't go into the actual evidence, but this is a gold standard document. If you're looking at trying to see the state of the science for particular health conditions around medical cannabis, please visit this report. They also provide recommendations for future research. They break down their therapeutic value of medical cannabis by conditions. So you can go in and drill down and understand where the evidence lies and what research studies have been done. Now, I'm also the president of an organization called the Cannabis Center of Excellence. It's a nonprofit based out of Massachusetts that uses citizen science methods, research methods for cannabis research studies. I've conducted 3 studies over the last few years. And out of 2 studies, specifically one of consumers and veterans, over 70% of our sample have reported using medical cannabis to reduce the use of unwanted over-the-counter or prescription medications. Now, this is very striking. And as we saw with a high opiate rate and overdose rate in Georgia and the potential of medical cannabis to be an alternative, this could be a very viable option. I also want to point the audience to a study that was conducted in 2019, which was the Veterans Health and Medical Cannabis Study. That looked at, again, veterans and their impact that medical cannabis has on their lives. I'd like to point people to the Cannabis Patient Care magazine. You can see the website up at the top. This publication is free to download and has specific information from the study about post-traumatic stress disorder and the role that medical cannabis can play. So that's the end of my sort of medical cannabis 101, and I'm quite excited now to hand off the microphone, so to speak, to Dr. Jay Smith, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Georgia Atlas.
Thank you, Dr. McNabb. That was a wonderful overview of the medical cannabis and the current state of the literature. As she said, I'm Jay Smith. I'm the current medical director at Northside, Gwinnett Emergency Department. I'm also the Chief Medical Officer for Georgia Atlas. I'm honored to work with Dr. Vinson, Dr. Perry Jilks, and Dr. Reisman, who sit on Georgia Atlas's Physician Advisory Board. And they effectively steer our company with oversight of a much larger physician advisory panel. On that panel, we actually have doctors who specialize in each of the 17 allowable conditions in Georgia, as well as a specialist who give additional guidance for patient conditions we hope to treat in the future. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I was asked to kind of talk about my journey, and if there was ever an example of someone, where you don't know where life's going to take you, I'm that guy. If you had asked me 10 years ago, are you going to be the chief medical officer for a medical cannabis company, I would have told you you're smoking something pretty strong. Because truthfully, I didn't believe in it. I was a naysayer, thought it was snake oil, as she had referenced earlier. If you didn't have a double-blinded placebo-controlled study, I didn't want to talk to you about it. Of course, that all dramatically changed when my 6-year-old daughter developed an intractable seizure disorder. I pulled every string I had. We literally had her being treated by the world's experts, and after countless medication regimens, several research studies that damn near killed her, they had nothing left, and she continued to get worse. And I distinctly remember our final meeting with a very prominent Harvard neurologist that when I asked him what's next, and I remember him shrugging his shoulders and him saying, we don't have anything left. And y'all should pretty much make peace with the fact that she's going to get worse and you're probably going to lose her. But that's where I credit a mother's love to why Marlo is still here today. My wife wouldn't take that answer, and she started researching every possible treatment out there. And I came home from work one day and there was an article on the kitchen table about medical marijuana and seizures. And that's when I said, okay, you've officially gone off the deep end, you've lost it. But she made me promise to read it, and I read it. And then I kept reading, and I kept finding more and more literature supporting it, and almost what I would say suppressed literature that was out there for years and years going back. So we moved to Colorado. We started her on the medical cannabis oil, and within a month, she had gone from 20 drop seizures a day to 1 a week. And then within a year, we were able to wean her completely off 3 of the 4 pharmaceuticals and she was down to one drop seizure every couple of months. She was able to return to school. It gave her a quality of life that no medical therapy had been able to give her. So in the research world, we would call that an N of one research study. So she's my N of one, and to say that I'm a believer would be an understatement. And fortunately, because of some relationships and involvement I have in medical organizations throughout the state, I was afforded a platform to discuss this with my colleagues across the state. And little by little, we started getting movement on it. And that in turn allowed me to testify at the state capitol on several occasions. And via the efforts of many, many, many people, we were able to move the football down the field, so to speak, year after year. Now, of course, we've had some setbacks, but we had a huge win 2 years ago when, as Dr. McNabb was talking about, they approved that we're going to have a grow in Georgia. And this is essential for patients to have access to that quality controlled, safe products, and for physicians to feel comfortable with what they're actually recommending somebody take. Can you advance the slide, please? So one of the things that I get asked a lot of is, well, what can I do? How do we do more? And we do still have a lot more to do. But truthfully, the people who have the ability to move the needle on this are the people watching this presentation. It's the patients. Patients need to ask their physicians about this as a possible treatment regimen. And if they're initially averse to it, encourage them to educate themselves and, refer them back to our various websites of everyone that's on this presentation. And then patients need to contact their legislators and share their personal success stories. You have way more power than you realize. You vote for these people, and those personal stories will help them move to action. And the medical community needs to lead on this. I'm very proud of the Medical Association of Georgia because unlike a lot of other states that have chose to kind of stick their head in the sand, the Medical Association has chosen to lead, and they've actually formed a task force that has all specialists represented, and they are currently giving recommendations to both the legislature and to the Cannabis Commission. And then finally, we just need more research. And that's one reason why I'm particularly excited about working with Georgia Atlas. Unlike a lot of the other larger companies that I met with, they truly are putting their money where their mouth is about research, and they have built it into their business model, a huge allocation towards it. And we've been able to build the physician advisory panel and physician advisory board, and they really are letting the physicians steer the company. And as Dr. McNabb mentioned, we've got a really neat study that we're launching today. So I appreciate being able to be part of this presentation, and I look forward to fielding questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. J. It's such an honor to work with you, and just really respect your work. And yeah, thanks for being part of the team. Excellent. So now moving on to Stanley Atkins, dear colleague and friend who I've known for a while and supported the 2019 Veterans Health and Medical Cannabis Study, and has been an integral part of the study that we're launching, two studies that we're launching today. So I'll hand it over to you, Stanley. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you so much, Dr. McNabb, for the introduction. Again, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Stanley Atkins II. I'm known as the CanniMedic. I am the Georgia chapter director of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. And my journey into this cannabis industry and my place in cannabis now is educator, but also business owner. And as Dr. J said, my journey started with myself as a patient. I was a full-time firefighter paramedic. I became sick about 7 years ago with gastrointestinal illness, and cannabis truly changed the way I looked at therapeutic treatments, the way I looked at alternative wellness, and also how we look at treating veterans, because I am a United States Navy veteran. And the advocacy started Capitol, working hard, understanding the laws that were changing and what needed to be changed in the law. So I figured I had to get up. Next slide.
Go.
So here in Georgia, we've got some key issues and the state of the medical cannabis program is going to change from its current landscape. But aside from the business aspect, we need to focus on the actual community. Some of the key issues for our communities of color and vulnerabilities, some areas of focus that I think we should really look into, and also COVID-19. How has COVID-19 changed how we look at healthcare? How is it changing treatment? And how could cannabis and CBD potentially be an alternative therapeutic modality for patients? Community engagement and harm reduction. These are going to be paramount. And this goes back to Dr. McNabb's previous comment in regards to the war on drugs, because we know that there are specific communities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. And that goes into social justice and equity. We have to make sure that we have an equitable playing field so that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in a growing industry. And last, we're going to touch on the veterans and cannabis. Next slide, please. So again, what happens next? The Georgia Access to Cannabis Commission is set to award 6 licenses, as you saw in the previous slide. We're looking to really grow this program, and these licenses are for the purpose of cultivation of medical cannabis for making medical cannabis low THC oil products. This is not for flower. There's no smokable or vapable products, nothing that can be used with a heating element, but that doesn't mean that we won't have therapeutic products. Next slide, please. Some of the key issues facing our communities. We have lots of issues facing communities of color and vulnerable communities. And if you don't know what those communities may be, that includes Black, Brown, people of Asian descent, Indian descent, African descent in different communities, but also vulnerable communities, communities below the line of poverty, community more affected by the war on drugs or the infestation of addiction and crime and violent crime and lack of education. So next slide, please. The communities of color and vulnerable communities. This does not just mean we're saying one particular race. This encompasses everyone. Vulnerable communities can be any person from any race, background, or religion. And some of the barriers and the issues that we face, even providing normal healthcare outside of cannabis healthcare, is access to healthcare, community education, community resources, poverty, food access, their dietary lifestyles that they have, access to fresh foods, the systemic racism that has been discovered in so many communities, so many different systems, the effects of mass incarceration, not just on the person incarcerated, but the impact that it may potentially have on his family. This person may be a care provider or the provider for that household. That takes us into affordable housing. We have patients that don't understand that their comorbidities or their disease processes are often fed into by their community. The lack of diet, fresh water, fresh fruits, vegetables, stress. Stress is proven as addition to be detrimental to your health. The effects of all of these are extra stressors on a community that's already lack of community development resources. And in some areas, and even here in Georgia, we're seeing gentrification where these disabled patients or these vulnerable communities, many of them on fixed income, are being pushed out of their houses. And this just adds to their healthcare problem. We look at over-policing in communities and neighborhoods, as well as unemployment. Unemployment has a 360 effect on a family and an entire household. Next slide, please. On the medical side, some of the key areas of focus that we really want to look at. And the reason we pick these issues is because HIV and AIDS patient is one of the paramount issues that we really want to, because Atlanta, and according to some reports by the CDC, the new infection cases and the rate of new infections of HIV and AIDS patients in Atlanta has been compared to Durban, South Africa, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and Bangkok, Thailand. So Atlanta sits at an epicenter of new infections. And if Atlanta can be the capital of treat new infections and cases of HIV and AIDS patients, I feel that we could potentially lead the charge in alternative therapeutic research for these patients. PTSD and mental health. Pre-COVID, there are a lot of unaddressed mental health communities and mental health patients that weren't getting the resources. And there were also people who didn't even understand mental health. Now take that and compile that with COVID-19, compile that with persons being quarantined for long periods of time, and we're seeing higher levels of addiction and things of that nature related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Chronic pain. This is one of the top issues that we see that patients are seeking relief for. We need to have a key focus on these patients. And the reason that ties into my next point is because of the opioid addiction that we have here in Georgia. This is close to me because I've done a lot of opioid outreach and Narcan training, and it hit home this weekend. Someone that my little brother knows, they had a 17-year-old female here that took what she thought was a 30 milligram Percocet and overdosed just a few days ago. While we have to reach out because it's now reaching into the younger community and the youth are being affected at an alarming rate. We need to look into COVID-19 research. There are a lot of articles at the beginning of the pandemic of cannabis and how that could potentially tie into CBD and COVID-19. So now we need to take some in-depth studies on patients and compare the pros, cons, and as Dr. Jay said, some really therapeutic medical in-depth studies. Hospice patients. When we speak about hospice patients, we're not more so looking to say the treatment of these patients or to get them better, but more so to adjust them a quality transition or a peaceful transition. We're looking to improve quality of life for these patients. We're understanding that these patients have a terminal diagnosis, and we're not looking for them to make that speedy recovery and come back like some patients, but we are looking to ease their transition and help them and their family during that process with some of the issues that may come with end-of-life care. And lastly, we want to make sure we focus on pediatric patients. There needs to be more research, as the doctors have spoken, research. The more research we have for pediatric patients, the better. Next slide, please. Community engagement and harm reduction. So some of the things that I've worked on is decriminalization efforts. I've been a part of 3 decriminalization efforts: the city of Atlanta, the city of South Fulton, and the city of Macon. And this ties into the cannabis industry because decriminalization really leads to harm reduction on the community. And that started with the war on drugs and the over-policing of these communities, and how decriminalization lessens the police's burden and the impact on the community for small possession crimes. Things that I like to say we need to look into are record expungements, pardons, and seals. There are qualified personnel who have very strong skill sets to work in the cannabis industry, but they may have made some mistakes in their younger life, and those mistakes should not keep them from blossoming into a career. So assisting those communities with the record expungements, the harm reduction, and community engagement. Social equity in areas, especially some of the larger adult use markets, they're creating these social equity programs to look at the areas that have been hardest hit by the war on drugs and over policing in the communities and see how can we develop a program to take those people affected and bring them into the industry. We need to look into the rise in violent crime. All of this ties into healthcare. If there's a violent crime, a person is shot, if someone loses a life, if someone could go to jail, that stress on the family, the recovery of the victims affected, and the burden of mental health from losing so many people to violent crimes. Addiction is one of the strongest points that I am for, because it is community development that doesn't support addiction in some areas. And we know that these programs have the people to sustain them. So we really want to try to go into the community and see how could we potentially assist addiction from opioids with cannabis. Health equity, that is important because we want the equal access to healthcare, and the quality of healthcare is paramount, and it makes sure it's even across the board. And lastly, job training. We want people in the community, we want people to get back to work. Well, sometimes they may need an additional skill. So those mentorship programs, corporate and partnership programs, and education programs. Next slide, please. And for veterans, this is one of the strongest points of support for me. I am a United States Navy veteran. I served on 2 combat tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. And when it comes to reaching out to veterans, there are different types of patient demographic. So we may have to take a different approach and really making sure that our message is well received. So that starts with outreach. We have to reach out to veterans, let them know that there are organizations in America that support them, that support their transition back home and want to help them in their journey as a veteran. Once we reach out to them, we want to make sure that we provide education. We want to provide them with the right facts. We don't want to provide them with opinions. We want to make sure that we give them the right education to really set them on their path of alternative wellness, but also include veterans in research. It is imperative that we have research to support the patient stories, to support the planning and to support the growth of the industry and the support of the medical expansion of these programs to see how can we develop better products, how can we develop stronger products, and how can we ensure that these products are actually working for our veterans that are consuming them. And also donations. There are many veterans that are disabled. These veterans are on fixed incomes. The veteran disability rating ranges from 10% to 100%. But I know there are a lot of veterans that can't afford these medications. They oftentimes can't afford their daily living expenses. So if we have programming or forward thinking, and how can we support these veterans with potential donations? I want to say thank you to the Georgia Hemp Company, who's assisted me on multiple occasions with donations and products for myself. And last, employment. How can we take these veterans who have served our country and develop sustainable job training skills, and how can we implement their skill set into the cannabis industry? We don't want them to think that because they're a military veteran, they can't work in the cannabis industry. We want to promote that because you served in the military, you deserve to work in the cannabis industry. And next slide. And that concludes it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your service and for your work. And to build upon, the points that you just made about veterans access. One of the main findings from our 2019 Veterans Health and Medical Cannabis Study was the immense value that veterans were finding in medical cannabis, both from psychological healthcare conditions as well as physical healthcare conditions. So chronic pain, PTSD. And the veterans reported in our sample is over 545 that, they found, 70% were using cannabis to reduce those prescription and over-the-counter medications. So they also report, medical cannabis improving the quality of their life by reducing alcohol and tobacco intake. So to your point of harm reduction, I think this is a great opportunity for our veteran colleagues, and quite excited that the study that we're launching today is also going to be focused on our Georgia veterans. So thank you, Stanley, for an excellent presentation. And now on to Angela. Angela Weston, who's the co-founder of the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, you can go ahead and advance the next slide. So my name is Angela Weston, of course, and I am the co-founder of the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society, which is a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. We're a nonprofit organization that was founded due to a need to serve the patients in the state of Georgia. We want to definitely educate our patients in the state of Georgia. With the majority of, I would say, our board and our members are cannabis patients. We know firsthand what it's like to be a patient, and also understand the cost of medical cannabis that's not so affordable for the patients. And that's one of the reasons why we really began to start it, because with myself and the co-founder both being patients, we understood how much it cost us. And we knew that there were patients out there who really needed the assistance. So that's how we pretty much began the organization, wanting to serve the community and help people to understand, number one, what cannabis is all about, and also to be able to find ways to help them for the cost of the medical cannabis. One thing about the medical cannabis industry, I would say, or the medical cannabis itself, it's not affordable to all patients. The evaluation in most cases are not covered by insurance. And when I say most cases, there are some providers who have found a way to be able to bill insurance for it. So you just have to pretty much find out those providers. And we do have a provider on our list of providers that we refer to that is able to bill insurance. That's one of the things that would actually affect the patient is the cost. The other one is there's that cost for the medical card itself, which is $25. Not all patients can actually afford that, depending upon if they're on Medicare or what have you. They may not be able to afford that $25 card fee along with the medical cannabis evaluation. And then you got the medicine itself. Of course, it's not supplemented by insurance, of course, because right now we don't have any dispensaries here. So without having local pharmacies and dispensaries, we lose that competitive edge, I would say, in the pricing. Like we know with other products that are out there on the market, when you have multiple people who actually offer that same product, you find some competitive pricing. So without that, we don't have that. And at this particular point in time, for us as patients, it's really wherever we can find it at this point. And we're at the mercy of whoever it is that is actually offering that product and what they actually charge. So that's one big, huge gap that we actually saw in the medical cannabis industry. And we wanted to try to do something to kind of bridge that particular gap. Also, we're looking at information as a gap in the reference to how to obtain that medical cannabis card or where you can go to be evaluated for the card. When most people think about getting information about their health, they aren't thinking about going to the Department of Health for that, which is, of course, on their website. There's a wealth of information about the medical cannabis program, what it actually entails, and the ailments that you have, or conditions, I would say, that you would have to be able to get that medical card. But that's not the first place that people would go. So if they do not know where to go, how would they be able to get that information? And that's one of the things that we do here at GMCS is we provide that information for those patients. We connect patients to providers that perform those evaluations. We're also reaching out to providers, asking them if we can put information in their office related to our organization on how patients can actually reach out to us so that we can give them that help that's actually needed. We also connect the patients with the information about the approved medical conditions in the state of Georgia and the cost of the card, and the next steps that they would need to take in order to be able to get that information or get the cards that they actually need. Now, there's also an education gap. Now, one thing about that, most of the information that people actually get is from people that they know from the street, or if they happen to have a medical provider that knows more about cannabis, they can get that information. But one thing I can say, being a patient myself, when I did receive the medical cannabis card, I was able to get the evaluation, I was able to get the card, but however, I didn't have any information about how I was supposed to use it. So that made it very difficult in figuring out how much I was supposed to take and how often I should be able to take it. And that information is not readily available out there for patients. So we like to work with the patients that call us and help to kind of help them through who had those same experiences that we had, since we know more about it now. We work with those patients on finding that, and as well as, like, say, for instance, a patient contacted us and said they ate an edible, they didn't like the way it felt, they didn't want to use it again. And so my basic question to them was, how much of that edible did you eat? So, and a number of people don't think about that when they're using an edible, if they've taken that oil and have had someone take the oil and make an edible for them, because some patients, of course, don't like the taste of the oil, so they may want to put it in an edible so they can, or in some type of a food product, so they could actually tolerate it a lot better. But just to know that if you have a brownie, that's not grandma's brownie. It's not the same unless grandma happens to be a medical cannabis patient. But however, people don't understand that when you are using a medical cannabis product as an edible, that you cannot eat the entire thing. You do have to take it low and slow. And that's what we tell our patients that contact us for information, is to take it low and slow. and also to document when you took it, what time you actually took it, how much did you take, and how long did it take for the effects to be able to, for you to be able to feel those effects and before you take it again. So that type of information we actually provide to the patients that we have. Not only that, we discuss the THC products itself. With that, I tell anybody who we speak to, or we tell anybody who we speak to, that when you take that THC product or product that has THC in it, if you begin to, as you continuously take it and you begin to no longer feel that elevation, as I call it, I don't say high, I say elevation, helping them to understand that what happens is your body will build up a tolerance to the THC. So you may not feel that same type of elevation. That doesn't mean that it's not working. That doesn't mean to continue to take more and more so you can actually feel that elevation. It's more about what the product is actually doing for you. Is it reducing your pain? Are you feeling less symptoms than you had before? So it's not about the elevation. It's basically about, is it still working? And of course, if you're not feeling that elevation, to understand that it's still working, but it's just that your body is now tolerating the amount that you're actually taking. So you're not going to feel that elevation like you felt when you first took it. Okay. And so with that, we also like to discuss the taste. That's another thing that we've actually heard from a number of patients that we've spoken to, is that when they use the cannabis oil, we don't like the taste of it. But we discuss with them that it depends upon how it was actually extracted. So it depends on whether they use alcohol methods for an extraction, or if they use CO2, which is my preferred method of extraction, or the products that I actually use. Because with the CO2 products, even though that method is more expensive, so you may not find as many people using that method because of the expense of, or the cost of it, but there is less of that aftertaste when they use the CO2 method to extract it. So so that's a difference, and that's something that some of the patients do not know, that the reason why you have that aftertaste sometimes with that is the way that they actually extracted it. So we have those particular discussions with the patients so they can understand that, and when they go to search for products, to go ahead and ask how the cannabis was extracted, and because that makes a difference in the actual taste of it. Okay. Another part of the educational gap that we like to talk about with our patients is that contact us is what to expect from the various delivery methods. Now, there are several different delivery methods, and you have to understand that each one of them works a little bit differently. So basically, if you think about it, if you actually inhale it or you take it sublingually, which means under your tongue, it's going to get into your bloodstream a lot quicker than you would if you actually ingest it, because it's not having to be metabolized by your liver, so it goes directly into your bloodstream. We also like to talk to them about the differences when they ingest it. It takes a little bit longer for that effect to take when you ingest, but to allow them to understand that before you take another dosage, wait at least 30 minutes to see how you feel, how your body has metabolized it before you take it again. There's a number of people, you may not realize that when you take specifically THC, when you take any product that has THC in it, your body metabolizes it and it comes out to be a different component, what's called 11-hydroxy-THC. And that happens to be more potent than the original THC that you first ingested. So you will start to feel that extra elevation in there, and you may not know why. Another part of that is diet. Watching what you eat when you're taking cannabis. Now, this is something I found out the hard way before I actually went to school and started to understand why this was happening. I noticed that anytime I ingested cannabis and it had THC, what I noticed is, or cannabis in general, I would say, when I ate some fatty foods, I realized that my elevation became more and more, it was increased. I didn't understand why, but I figured that every time I ate something fatty, I knew that it was a problem. So what I did was, when I was taking cannabis, I made sure that I was not eating a fatty food. But of course, when I got into school and started learning more about the cannabis plant and learning more about how it works with the body, I realized, or found, or taught, I would say, that cannabis happens to be lipophilic. Okay. And what that actually means is it loves fat. So we kind of go into that information. And now that I have a better understanding of it, I have an opportunity to be able to educate the patients on how it actually works with your body. And what happens when you eat certain foods, and how to watch your diet when you're using cannabis. So that's very, very important for people who are first using that, because of course, if you're eating fatty foods and you're using cannabis and you're starting to feel that way, I wouldn't want a patient to not take it, knowing that it's a medication that can actually help because they've elevated themselves in the way that they actually feel. Okay. And also with that, we like to give general information about the cannabis plant itself. And of course, again, how it works with the body. We like to try to explain the endocannabinoid system. We want to talk about the CB1 and CB2 receptors. We definitely want to educate our patients on the entire plant. We'll talk about terpenes, specifically terpenes that I actually love. One is linalool, because it's found in lavender. There's another one, pinene and myrcene, and those are actually good for inflammation. Talk about limonene, which is, it also helps relieve your stress and your anxiety. So we want to start getting into more of that. And as I said, as we are educating ourselves at the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society, we're passing that information along to our patients to help them to be educated as well. Definitely talk about the differences between CBD and THC versus CHC, because of course, you know, CBD is everywhere. So we definitely want to have those conversations with them about CBD, making sure that they have some reputable places to be able to go to if they're going to use THC. And then lastly, we'd like to try to start talking about, we're starting to talk about more, I would say, about the other cannabinoids, because of course, people mainly hear about THC and CBD, but don't realize that they're more cannabinoids than that. You have like the CBN, CBG, THCA, CBDA, all of those, and some of those have some like antibiotic properties. So there's more to that cannabis plant than just the THC and the CBD. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so when the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society was founded, our original plan was to provide medical cannabis oil at no charge to card-holding patients who couldn't afford it. However, because it's federally illegal, we were not able to go forth with that charge. And hopefully once it becomes legal, we can get back to doing that via donations to be able to help those patients who are unable to afford it. But what we are doing right now, of course, along with the education on our website, which is www.georgiamcs.org, we have links to the Georgia Department of Health. We have information about the medical conditions, steps to obtain the medical card in Georgia, information about cannabis and cannabis news. And we also have information and a link to the Georgia Access to Medical Cannabis Commission's website, which is that commission that I think Stanley had mentioned that we're talking about, that's actually, and Dr. McNabb mentioned as well, that's working on getting the licenses here in Georgia for growing and also dispensaries. We also have a referral program. We are building that program as well. Now, we do have a few doctors that we work with that we refer our patients to, but we're also building that directory of doctors. So we'll have more doctors affiliated with us in the state that we can actually refer the patients to who perform those evaluations. Also, we have coming up this summer, the target date for that, for our first podcast, is actually going to be on July the 10th, which is 710, and turning that upside down. And by 710 upside down, it stands for oil. So we have that coming up. Also, we were working on educational videos on our YouTube and social media platforms, and we'll have more programs coming up as soon as we can actually get the funding. Right now, we're self-funded. So the co-founder and I basically fund everything that we're doing right now. So hopefully we'll be able to get more donations so we could be able to serve more patients. Okay, next slide, please. So the Canna Shame campaign. So this particular campaign that we have, it was started or founded or created, I would say, in an effort to eliminate the stigma surrounding cannabis. So we want to help people understand that cannabis is a plant. This is a plant that's been used for medicinal purposes in other countries and also in Western medicine prior to it becoming illegal. We want to start removing those disclaimers that we talk about. So the disclaimers meaning anyone who is an advocate for cannabis, who pretty much can say, yes, I know that cannabis works, but I don't use it. So we want to be able to eliminate those disclaimers. We want people to be comfortable. We want the word cannabis to be something natural that people can say. It's natural, it's a plant. So be comfortable in saying it. Be comfortable in coming out of the closet and saying that you actually do use it. We want it to be as simple as, say, for instance, if someone has pain and they take aspirin for a headache. We want the word cannabis to be as simple as, I use cannabis for my pain, and not an aspirin or not a Tylenol. So that's part of our charge in increasing also the number of card holding patients in the states to be able to get more funding. So we know that numbers speak. So the more people you have registered with the states, the better the opportunity of being able to get funding and additional resources. So we definitely want people to be comfortable, come out of the closet, be registered, and speak up that you use medical cannabis or that you're an advocate for cannabis. Okay. Now, how did we get started? So this campaign was actually inspired by our co-founder, Yolanda Bennett. It just so happens that she responded to a post on Facebook, and someone apparently did not agree with the comment that she actually made, and they trolled her page. So when they trolled her page, they saw the cannabis logo that she had on her page and immediately began to shame her. And so that's where this was born, when she basically said, this person tried to canna shame me. So that's how this campaign actually began, because it seemed that person seemed to have weaponized cannabis, as opposed to understanding that she's using it for a reason. Never asked, but they immediately, because of the stigma, weaponized it. So that's one of the reasons why this campaign is so important to us, because we want to decrease that particular stigma on cannabis. So our campaign goals that we actually have that are coming up, number one, we definitely want to educate people on how cannabis became illegal. That's something that a number of people do not know, that there's a history as a reason why. And I know Dr. McNabb stated some of those reasons why in her presentation earlier about why cannabis became illegal, because at some point it was legal in the United States. We want to start having panel discussions with patients, advocates, and healthcare professionals. We're going to be doing some consumer reporting on products that we've actually tried. We are affiliated with a local store right now that carries the hemp products and has a very knowledgeable staff. That information is actually on our website. And we do have a discount program with them. So if you use the discount code when you purchase from them, you'll get a 10% discount on their products. So definitely visit our website to get that information, to be able to get those discounts. Specifically, if you're looking for any Delta 8 products, which happen to be legal, I would say right now, to be able to use that as an alternative until we can get some legal products now. We're also going to have some monthly highlights of patient stories, have patients talk about their experiences. And we definitely have a Canna Shame program that's coming up, or a Canna Shame package that's going to be coming very soon, which will include t-shirts, wristbands, stickers, et cetera. A lot of promotional items that can be purchased to help donate and to spread this call of action. So we want this to be not just in the state of Georgia, but we want this to be nationwide, to pretty much, as we say, stop this Canna Shame stop the Canna Shame, or end the stigma for cannabis. And we have some various events that will be coming up as well. We're currently working on a major event that we'll be discussing going forward. So please follow us on our website and social media platforms and stay informed. We can go to the last slide here. And so here's our website to the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society's website. So please visit our website and join us in this campaign to stop the Canna Shame. Thank you all for your time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really lovely presentation. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing for medical patients. It's extremely important. And the Canna Shame campaign is extremely important. I know I'm going to get my package, wear my shirt. I hope everybody on this webinar, who watches this webinar, also does the same. It's very important. I'll come out of the closet. I'm a medical cannabis patient. I'm wearing a cannabis leaf as a piece of jewelry. So I think it's really important to step up and end this, because as you mentioned, it has always been a medicine. It was legal. And now we need to educate our community and our providers. So thank you so much. Now, I know we're drum roll. Very excited that today Georgia Atlas is launching a Georgia medical patients and veterans research study together with the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society, as well as with the CanniMedic. So this is an anonymous research study. It's a survey that takes approximately 10 minutes to complete. Anybody in the state of Georgia can take this. It's not prerequisite cannabis at all. We ask about health conditions, symptoms, current treatments. If you have consumed cannabis in the past, we ask a few questions about that. Again, not required to participate. You'll be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card, and we'll announce first round of winners on August 31st, 2021. There'll be one winner. And so please, after you take the survey, you can share your email address with us if you're interested. We don't collect any personal identifying information throughout the study. And if you're a U.S. military veteran, we're also quite interested to hear from you. We have specific questions included. Very honored to be working with all of these study investigators on this research study, including everyone on this webinar today, members of our Georgia Atlas Medical Board and Medical Advisory Board, Patient Advisory Panel, and colleagues at the National Native American Cannabis Association and others. So thank you all for joining this important research study. Again, if you are a U.S. military veteran in Georgia, there are over 600,000 U.S. military veterans in Georgia. We want to hear from you. We will share this information back right with the community, with the veteran community, and with legislators and the wider healthcare community as well, to advance the needle on providing access to medical cannabis and low THC oil for veterans in the state of Georgia. So please, we do not collect any personal identifying information for this study. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to bit.ly/GA study to take the research study, take the survey. Again, it'll only take 10 minutes. And if you're in the state of Georgia, we welcome you. Another research study that we're very excited to launch today or be a part of, or announce that Georgia Atlas is a part of, is a healthcare provider knowledge, attitude, and practices related to medical cannabis research study that was launched by a nonprofit that I established called the Cannabis Center of Excellence. The Cannabis Center of Excellence has partnered with Medicinal Genomics, which is a leader in cannabis science testing based out of Massachusetts. Medicinal Genomics founded CanMed, which is one of the leading cannabis educational conferences in the United States, bringing together researchers and clinicians from around the world who are studying the latest advances on medical cannabis. They provide continuing medical education credits, and we've partnered together to launch this study to understand what medical providers know about medical cannabis. Everybody from physicians to pharmacists to dentists to nursing to social work to emergency medicine. We want to hear from you. What do you know about medical cannabis? How did you learn it? And what do you want to know about medical cannabis? And how would you want to learn that? We want to encourage and hear from providers themselves so that we can work to develop educational materials and feed the data right back out to the community to understand and drive the conversation forward. We now know our patients are educated, and we've heard all today about patients knowing and having access to information about medical cannabis. And we're quite excited to now start to engage the healthcare provider community to ensure that they also, knowing that the endocannabinoid system has not been included in medical education for the past several decades, how do we work to change that paradigm in the future? So if you are any kind of medical provider, please do take this survey. You can go to bit.ly/HCP-CannaStudy, and you can be anywhere in North America, so in any state or in Canada. And if you take the survey, you can be entered to win a free ticket to CanMed this year, which is an $820 value, and continuing medical education credits are included. We will be presenting some of the preliminary results of this study at CanMed in the fall this year. We'll be in Pasadena, in addition to a veterans study that I spoke about earlier. A more advanced presentation will be presented there. So I'm very excited to launch these two studies, and thank you all so much for the time today to attend, and I know we've gone a little bit over, but we've gone a little bit over into our optional Q&A. But I thank everybody for their time, and I thank all the speakers for being a part of this wonderful event. I think we can go ahead and turn on all of our videos and now move into our optional Q&A period. So, all right. That was great, Dr. J. What do you think?
Yeah, oh, loved it. And I was able to respond to a couple of participants' questions during the.
Great. Vanessa, have you identified any potential questions from the audience? You open the. All right, we've got one right here. Excellent information today. This is from Yvette. She's the founder and CEO of Rock Rose Cosmetics. Her products are clean, vegan, cruelty-free, and many other awesome things. Great, thank you. I appreciate that. The Rock Rose essential oil as well as CBD. She's found the literature and benefits on cannabis in the skin. Harvard Journal is a good one. Can you point me to where I can find information on benefits related to cannabis and dermatology? Does anybody want to take that one? Cannabis in the skin. I'll start with first the publication that I presented, the National, the Health and Health Effects of Cannabis report by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. They look at all different conditions, and I believe they do probably have a skin-related section. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
They do have some derm literature in there. And as you said, that is kind of the holy grail. Good place to start.
Angela, do you have any topical knowledge?
Not as much as of yet. That's something that we're actually looking into as well. The other areas that you can actually use it, the patches and so forth. So we're looking into more information. And so we'll be able to have some of that information on our website coming soon as we find more information about how to use it topically.
Cool. Yeah, I know it's really interesting when you think about the skin, because there's new emerging technologies like transdermal patches, but then you've got salves and lotions, and the different and whether or not you're looking at pain versus anything from like dermatitis type of condition. So yeah, I would suggest looking at that the National Academies report, definitely. And moving along, actually, I'm just reading your response, Dr. J, to Sophia's interesting question. I wonder if we could re-ask it. You could answer it live as well. Her question, Sophia Renee, was, please share any insight on this treatment helping with stroke recovery and getting off the related prescription medications.
Sure, and I guess the delineation there is that stroke as a diagnosis or history of a stroke is not one of the allowable conditions under the state law currently, but it's not uncommon for patients post-stroke to have certain spasticity disorders, peripheral neuropathies, could develop seizure disorders depending on the type of stroke it was, and then also phantom limb pain, intractable pain. So if someone had secondary results from that stroke of neuropathy or intractable pain, those would be two that someone might be a candidate to get a medical marijuana card from the state and be able to start treatment.
Cool. All right, those were our two open questions. So everybody, if you're interested, you can click on the Q&A box if you have a question for any of our panelists. In the meantime, I'd like to ask if you're interested in getting a low THC oil card, Angela or Stanley, do you know where where patients could go in Georgia right now to find a doctor to get a card?
Yes, for us, yeah, you can definitely go to our website, which of course is www.georgiamcs.org. We do have a list of providers that are there. You can contact us via phone as well, and our numbers on the website as well, and we can help direct you and also help assist you with getting those those appointments. We'll call the doctors for you and have them reach back out to you to set up those particular appointments. So we do have providers on our website that we associate with and refer our patients to.
Cool, awesome. And Sophia just responded again, and specifically, her response is specifically anxiety, PTSD from the stroke experience, also managing high blood pressure. While I just make a disclaimer here that Sophia, we can't provide individual advice. That'll be definitely at the direct follow-up with the clinician outside of this webinar. But in general, for anxiety and PTSD, we've seen in the research studies that I've done, people find significant relief using medical cannabis for anxiety and PTSD. However, what's interesting is finding the right type of cannabis that will work for you and your anxiety and your PTSD. So there are indicas, there are sativas, there are things that kind of relax you. There are types of cannabis that relax you, and there's other types of cannabis that energize. And those types of cannabis can be trigger points for an anxiety or a PTSD type of condition, from what I've seen in research studies and in other places. So in the studies that I've conducted, also anti-anxiety medications are one of the medications that people are looking to replace the use of with medical cannabis. It's one of the top, specifically now in COVID. Running a COVID-19 and medical cannabis study, and more of those respondents are reporting anxiety as one of their top conditions for consuming cannabis. I mean, with COVID, obviously, anxiety and PTSD, I think incidents have both increased significantly. Just trying to understand that you're not alone. Other people are considering these alternative options. My recommendation would be to go to a clinician and be transparent about it. And even if you're both learning together, it's important for your healthcare provider who's prescribing those medications to understand that you're also looking to use a legal alternative substance. So Dr. J, I don't know if you want to add anything. I just wanted to pop a little bit of population science in there.
The PTSD is a qualifying condition. Again, it just requires a physician. It's a really easy form. The state, I gotta give it to the state. They made it pretty easy. You just put which one of the qualifying conditions, and they are literally signing it, attesting that you have that condition. And I think that's what I really preach to physicians, because they have a lot of anxiety around it. The liability and everything. And I was like, that's the whole purpose that the state did this, is it removes the liability from the physician. All they're doing is attesting that you have that particular condition that meets the state list of qualifications. So PTSD would be one. You would just need to find a physician that would attest to that, send it in, you can get your card. And then to what Dr. McNabb says, very important to be open with your physicians about this, because to her point about the different strains, there are some strains that could make it worse if you took them and you were unknowing of it. And then the other thing that I wanted to add is that there are drug interactions. So depending on what other drugs you are taking that are prescribed to you, some of those via the cytochrome P450 and other systems will jack them up in your system higher than they're supposed to be, or they'll be subtherapeutic and you require more. So that, again, that's just something you need to be open and honest with your physician about. And the resources are there for them to educate. And that's where a lot of patients, if they're going to their doctors, can initiate that conversation and actually get that physician started on the path of learning about it. Because as Dr. McNabb said earlier, it is not in our curriculum. I did not get any teaching on this in the 8+ years of training that I had, which is really sad. But we're hoping to change that, and we're having some conversations with several of the medical schools in the state that for Georgia Atlas to come in and team up on some things. But bright stuff on the future.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, it's really important, specifically on the opioids, and when you're understanding a prescription cocktail of drugs, and you're now introducing cannabis into that, and how that not only between an opioid and cannabis, how those interactions happen, which can be complex, but also, now you've got an anti-anxiety in there, right? And how are all of those polypharmacy interactions? And I know, Stanley, you know quite a bit about this, and I wonder what your thoughts are around, like, specifically in the veteran population, when we know veterans sometimes are taking cocktails of some 20, 30, 40, 50 meds, and then successfully, I know I have a colleague and yourself and another colleague I have produced significant numbers of medications with cannabis down to zero and only using medical cannabis. So what I'd love to hear your thoughts about the polypharmacy.
Again, it is imperative that you collaborate with your physician. I think the number one problem for veterans is that I haven't really met many veterans that say, hey, yes, I openly told my physician that I consume cannabis. My physician usually found it in my urine or during blood analysis. Then they have the conversation with them. I'm more forthcoming with my physicians, and they will, and there's reasons for that. So again, to the polypharmacy approach. So for those who may not know what that is, that's a person that's taking several medications to mitigate several problems that they have in their body. So you take this pill for this one for this, and so on. A lot of veterans are taking sometimes dozens of medications a day, and we want to make sure that we're preaching safety, because it's all about patient safety. Anyone who's a clinician or works in healthcare knows the motto is do no harm. And so with the education and the information to these veterans, we want to make sure that we tell them, please consult with your physician, talk to your physician, don't just stop medication cold turkey, because there are some drug classes, including some of the potential tricyclic antidepressants, the musculoskeletal relaxants, and some of the benzodiazepines, that if some of these patients who've been taken, who their treatment team has worked them up to a high level dosage, if they stop that overnight, it could potentially send them into a neurological emergency, some cardiac emergencies. We've even seen seizures in some cases. So we want to make sure that as we transition them off, we're doing it safely and in a way that's the most therapeutic for the patient.
Absolutely. Angela, do you have anything to add to the, have you seen and encountered in some of the patients that you've worked with, people working to try and get off of some of these medications and some of the successes or challenges that they faced?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, just the co-founders, we have our own success stories of that, of being on cocktails of opioids and after using medical cannabis are no longer on those particular drugs. But it's definitely important, as Dr. James Smith has said and Stanley's mentioned, and so for you, Dr. McNabb, that it is important to have these conversations with your healthcare providers, and especially when Dr. Smith talked about the drug-drug interactions, that is very important in looking into that and understanding that how our body metabolizes and the enzymes that it uses to do that, they can counteract each other or cause it not to work. So that's very important in keeping with that. A number of times people don't want to tell their providers that they're using cannabis, but they really need to open up and really be able to have that conversation. But it also comes into educating that provider. Maybe that's a provider who may have been interested and wants to know more information. So by you opening up with them, that may coerce them to go and find out more about it to be able to help you in your healthcare program. So it's definitely important to be able to have those conversations with your providers and help them to understand more. Even if they're not an advocate for it, they need to know that you're on it. And they also need to know the other medications that you have. I can say personally, what I've actually done is I connected each and every one of my providers. So any test I take, any medication that's been added to my regimen or anything like that, every provider knows what I'm taking, so that we can kind of prevent those drug interactions and so forth. So that's just basically my take on that. Just to make sure you do talk to your healthcare provider, have those conversations, and be able to get them educated as well. Because there's a number of providers that don't know a lot about cannabis and need to know more about it, since it's actually in use now for medicinal purposes.
Absolutely. And, and to build on your earlier point, I think of writing it down and documenting what you take, how much you take, and how it helped you feel and how long it took to impact, or, from time to onset, is important, because when you're discussing with your provider, that's when you're going to start to dial in your dosing and what works for you. And I didn't like this particular strain, or I like this. And then you're honing in all these choices, because sometimes I think we've seen in other places, in other states, patients get really excited, really eager. They go in and they buy all these products, spend a lot of money, and maybe not find the right thing that they want the first time, but then, are turned off from moving forward. We don't want that to happen. Cannabis is great, but be aware of that, and do a little bit of homework before you read and attend education like events like this, and go and meet with Georgia Medical Cannabis Society or the CanniMedic to really understand what would be right for you, so you can make the right first choices and really integrate this as a medicine. So we don't have any more open Q&A. So with that, it's close to 5:30. I want to thank our panelists for everything, for the presentation, for working on this research study together, for the time today. I want to thank all the attendees for coming and hanging around until with our Q&A. I point us to the Georgia Medical Cannabis and Veterans Research Study. Please, if you are a resident in the state of Georgia, please take this anonymous survey. You can scan this QR code or go to the bit.ly link and take the survey. You can go visit georgiaatlas.com and you can find the survey link there. We will be presenting preliminary findings in early September of 2021. So stay tuned. The information that you share, we will be sharing back out with you. We want to create this as a study, not to collect data and hide it away. We're intending to collect this information and to share that with the Georgia State Legislature, with patients themselves, with healthcare providers, with other policymakers and stakeholders. We want to advance the industry in a data-driven way. So just know that your information, the anonymous information that you provide, will be used that way. You can follow Georgia Atlas on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And again, georgiaatlas.com. And Angela, do you want to repeat all of your social media links for the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society and how they can get in touch with you?
Oh, definitely. Okay. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society. You can search for us there, but you can also find us on our website at georgiamcs.org. And all of our information is there, our phone numbers, email addresses. We have a contact card on there where you can put your information in and someone will call you back if you prefer not to call up front. But just know that every conversation that we have is confidential. So please understand when you contact us that your information stays with us and it doesn't go anywhere. So feel free to reach out to us for all the information that you need or for assistance.
Thank you for the services you provide for our medical patients. Really appreciate it. Stanley, do you want to give a shout out for how people can contact you and all of your social?
Yes, you can find me on just social media platforms at the CanniMedic. It's at THECANNIMEDIC. You can also search me by my name. I am also on LinkedIn, Stanley Atkins II. If you need to send me some information or reach out to me, you can reach out at director@CanniMedic.org and be on the lookout because we are relaunching CanniMedic.org summer 2021. So stay tuned, guys. You can also follow the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society and Georgia Atlas on all social media platforms as well. So stay connected and stay tuned because we got plenty more great things for you here in Georgia.
Awesome. Dr. J, how can we get in touch with you?
Through Georgia Atlas at this point. We can go to the website and I think they've got my new email address up there. So happy to stay in contact with people if I can help them.
Awesome. And same here. If folks want to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn with my personal page. And you can also reach out to Georgia Atlas. I'm very excited that we'll be sharing data and information. And again, if you're a resident of Georgia, please take our study. If you're a healthcare provider, please take that study. We'll be using all of this data and information to drive change. So thank you, everybody, for your time today and for a wonderful event. We hope to host another one again soon. So.